Good afternoon. I'd like to provoke you to think. Not persuade you to believe as I do, but to provoke you to think about issues of race, diversity, the changing face of our nation, perhaps as you've never thought about these subjects before. I'd like to start by telling you a story, a true story, a story that I tell to my friends who know that from time to time I'm asked to come and say a few words along these lines. To my friends who know that I've done a little TV and radio now and then, and that I've written a book. My friends who say to me, why? Why are you obsessed, they ask. And they sort of shrug and they say, you know, I don't really think about race all that much myself. To which I'm always tempted to reply, well, yes, exactly. That's part of the problem. But their inquiry is so sincere and so earnest, it deserves a better response than just a quip, and so I tell them this story. I'm not obsessed. We all are. We all have race and ethnicity on our minds, even, or perhaps especially, when we don't realize that that's what we're thinking about. It's not as if I wake up every morning and go to work in the Bay Area thinking to myself, here I go, an Asian American. I don't think about where my grandparents were from every waking moment of every day any differently than any of you do. No, I think about, well, I think about weather, I think about the weather. I think about the errands I have to run. As a law professor, I think about how to write a civil procedure exam that no student can possibly ever answer properly. I think about how to spend more time with my wife and our dogs, not always in that order. And so it's funny how often, it's not every day, but it's often enough. I'll be walking down the street, maybe it's Market Street in San Francisco, or it's in Washington, D.C., where I lived for so many years, or it's in Detroit, my hometown. And I'll have one of those encounters, just by chance, with a stranger that will remind me yet again how important the color of skin, the texture of hair, the shape of eyes is. How it strikes people first and foremost, not last and least. It goes something like this. So maybe I've taken the BART and I've gotten off and I'm walking there, and there's a kid coming down the sidewalk, going the other way. Maybe he's been minding his own business. He's, I don't know, 7 years old, 8 years old, just a boy, white, maybe black, coming down the street, and he sees me when I get to within 25 feet, 20 feet of him, and he stops and smiles. And as soon as I notice that he's staring at me, I can predict what will happen next. Maybe you can too. He's going to strike a pose. It's a karate, kung fu, martial arts pose. Right there on the street, he wants to challenge me to a fight, right? There's some howling, some hissing, ching-chong, something or the other. Maybe he punches at the air, and then laughing, he runs away. Now, I could chase this kid down the sidewalk and collar him and say, you're a bigot, but I wouldn't do that, because after all, he's just a kid. Right? This is, well, it's a joke. It's trivial. It's nothing. He'll have forgotten it by tomorrow. He doesn't know how traumatic it was for me when I was his age. Not that long ago, and it used to happen to me every day that I'd be challenged to a kung fu match, or asked if my parents were communists, if I ate dogs, how I could see with eyes like that, and so on and so forth. No, he has no memory of any of that. And yet, he does what he does. Well, I wonder why. I don't blame him, because as a kid, he's no different than any other kid. He watches a lot of TV, he goes to the movies, and after all, if he sees someone like me on the screen for more than 2 seconds, this has started to change a little bit. Well, what is it, after all, I'm doing? Breaking cinder blocks with my head, right? It's crouching tiger, hidden dragon. So when I go by, he says, yo, what's up, Jackie Chan? Of course, he's following a script. That's what a stereotype is. It's a script. It tells people how others will behave, how they should generalize, and how they in turn should respond. And he has these images rattling around in the back of his head, no different, truth be told, than you or me. It's not that he's thinking about race, it's just, well, it is about race. Why do I say that? Because I notice, you can't help but notice, that when he goes about his business after he's scurried off, he doesn't challenge anyone else to a kung fu match. No, it's just people who look like me. Even if I'm wearing a coat and tie, he's pretty sure I've got that black belt down underneath. And I know as well that when I share this story, it turns out uncannily that everyone, male or female, of Asian descent, of East Asian background, between the ages of 4 and 80, it's happened to them too, more than once. And so this forms a pattern. This tells us something. Sometimes I'm a little offended. I want to chase the kid down and tell him, you know, I'm offended. Not as an Asian American, mind you. I'm offended as someone with a good sense of humor. If you're going to diss me, get some new material, you know? I've seen this 100 times. You're not even good at it, right? So that's why I do what I do, because I know that even if I'm thinking about something else altogether, that these issues pop up unexpectedly. For anyone who's a woman, who's a person of color, and a lawyer, you know what I'm talking about. It's when you go into a courtroom where they haven't seen you before and they think you're the defendant, the interpreter, the clerk. They think you're anybody but the lawyer. In fact, they think your client who's in shackles is the lawyer because, well, you couldn't possibly be the lawyer and advocate. So it's those little slips. Now, mind you, I can laugh this off, and I do with you, because that kid, when he does the karate moves, he's not going to keep me from buying a house that I want to buy. Though the house that I did buy, when we looked at the deed, lo and behold, there was a restrictive covenant. Can't be enforced now, but it's right there in the deed. Nor will he keep me from taking my wife out to a nice dinner. He can't really affect my life very much at all, except he'll grow up. He'll grow up, and if he doesn't get to know someone who looks different than he is, but perhaps is just the same, I wonder what will happen someday when he's in a very different role, when he's in a responsible role, when he's interviewing someone to hire for a job at a law firm. If he might look at that Asian American candidate and think, oh, good with computers and math, but not with people skills. And if he might think for just a moment of his favorite Bruce Lee martial arts flick that he caught on late night TV, and if somehow these images just floating around might affect how he responds. It's all these little moments, each of them nothing in and of themselves. You have to be hypersensitive, too PC to bristle at them. We can and should brush them off. It's the moment when someone comes up to me after I've given a talk and says, you know, I wanted to let you know, you speak English so well. To which I always reply, gee, thanks, so do you. And it happens less and less, especially in California, but it still happens. And I know that I do it as well. And so I would confess to you, I won't ask you if you have done this too, but that I have done what that kid who does the karate moves has done. I've done far worse. Walking around in San Francisco or in a city that I don't know so well, when there's a stranger on the street who I catch a glimpse of, maybe if I'm lost and it's late and I'm in a neighborhood that, well, I don't quite feel comfortable in, and there's someone coming toward me, I catch sight of them, and I know nothing of this stranger any more than the kid who encounters me, other than that I can see that they're young and black and male. Maybe with sweatpants or a baseball cap on backwards, as if that told us anything. And I must admit that there have been moments when, without thinking at all, in just a second, without noticing what I've done, that I've maybe picked up the pace a little bit, crossed the other side of the street. Maybe there's a look of anxiety or concern on my face. It's probably involuntary, and I feel guilty about it once I get back to the car and get in and am relieved and lock the doors and drive home, and I think, well, you know the statistics. And that kid, he doesn't know what I'm thinking, and I believe in civil rights. Well, for all I know, that kid was a student at UC Hastings, and yes, he doesn't know what I'm thinking or feeling, except that he's had this response before. That others, upon catching sight of him, upon glimpsing him and knowing nothing, without uttering a word in an exchange that couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds on the street, we have signaled to this young man, you are a thug. You're vicious, you are to be avoided, you are criminal, you're not safe. I don't feel comfortable. And so when this happens, I catch myself. I think, how often do you have to be on the receiving end of that before you get the message, before you become embittered, before we start a vicious cycle that leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy, even though we're good and decent and we didn't mean anything by it, and well, we were going to cross the street just then anyway, as we rationalize it to ourselves. So the challenge is, I submit to you, in this new era of ours, in a time when we will undergo a transformation. It's already happening in California, but the nation as a whole. We, within our lifetimes, we will be witness to a transformation never before made by any human society on the face of the globe in recorded history, peacefully, much less successfully. It is, we will cease to have a single identifiable racial majority. It's already visible in this room, in the leadership. It's already visible in all the marriages that are mixed. It's visible in California, which represents, despite these current setbacks, still represents hope and the future. What will we make then of this society of ours? I submit to you the challenge of civil rights in this new multiracial, multicultural environment that we, and more importantly, our children and grandchildren find themselves in. The new challenge of civil rights is very different than the story that we have told ourselves. The conventional narrative, a triumphalist narrative from darkness to light, is a story of villains and victims. You know this story. It is taught to us in schools, and we respect it as we should. It is a story of those who are hateful and do the most heinous wrongs. They are members of the KKK, or they're skinheads. They drive people from neighborhoods. They burn crosses on lawns. They participate in the worst, egregious, explicit, violent forms of bias and prejudice toward people because of their race, because of their faith. They deny jobs and promotions. They mistreat people publicly. And then there are the victims. Faceless, nameless, passive, not agents of their own destiny, who have these wrongs visited upon their communities, their bodies. And we have the records, the documents. You can look at movies, you can look at legal cases, you can look at the photos, but we must avert our gaze because it is too horrible to look upon and to contemplate that once in the past there were such crimes as lynchings, that they were common, that the respected leaders of the bench and the bar took place wearing sheets, anonymous, yet that these things happened. Well, they still do from time to time. There are still cases. We read about them against household names. I won't mention any here, but you know, against companies, against government agencies that settle, not for nuisance value, but for tens of millions, hundreds of millions. Legal cases, class actions, so that still happens here and there. But I'd like to suggest that when we tell ourselves this comforting story, for it is in the end comforting, we take solace that we are neither villains nor victims, that we know better, that we teach our children not to use the N-word, that was the old South, that was something for the history books, for the museums, that it is no longer. Well, when we tell the story this way, as a literal, figurative, metaphorical black and white, we ignore what I believe is the challenge now, which is not those cases, though we must fight them, and fight them with law and by every other means that we have, but it is everything else, those little things, the burden of history that we share together, all the actions that we're complicit in, those inadvertent, almost unconscious moments when each of us is ourselves a perpetrator. No matter what our own backgrounds, no matter that we too have faced bias. And this is borne out, this isn't just a little story that I tell. The social scientists, the psychologists who run the most sophisticated tests will tell you that you can tease it out of just about everyone, including, most tragically, as they showed in Brown versus Board in 1954, the psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark. People have these biases toward their own groups, toward themselves, because we just grow up with them. You'll recall that in Brown versus Board, it was the African-American school children, the girls, young girls, asked to pick what doll they wanted to play with, what doll was pretty, what doll idealized beauty, what doll they wanted to be. Not in every instance, but in a remarkable number, they picked the white doll over the black doll, even though they themselves were African-American. That continues to this day. There are all these studies that confirm for us that lurking, for me no differently than for the kid who does the karate moves, lurking somewhere beneath the surface. It doesn't emerge unless, well, unless you have too many drinks, you're a little angry in an economic crisis, something provokes it, but I've seen it happen too. If maybe, well, I'm in a parking lot and I want that space and someone else wants the space and I get there first and they roll down their window and shout, "Go back to where you came from," and then out comes this invective about chinks and Japs and gooks, when all it was before was just a parking space and now it's a racial incident, just another little moment that tells us who belongs where and to whom the parking space, and more than that, our society in turn belongs. This is our challenge then. What will we do working together? What will we do in a society where numerically soon no one of us can count ourselves solidly within a majority? When the comfort that we take must be in principles and ideals of equality and dignity and respect. I'll close by telling you another story, a story that I tell to my friends as well. Because many of my friends, my good friends who do believe in civil rights, I have many friends, and I would ask you to picture someone like this. You'll know someone like this as soon as I describe who they are. They're the friend who, they remember marching. They were there in 1963 when Dr. King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. It's funny how many people were there in their memories. Even people who weren't alive then turn out to have been there, to have marched. No one remembers having turned on the fire hoses or sicked the police dogs on the Freedom Riders or thrown tomatoes or rocks. Although all you have to do is look at the old Norman Rockwell paintings, if you've seen those, for the Saturday Evening Post. Look at the old newsreels, the photos, the families, the mothers and fathers and teenagers engaged in massive resistance, hatred on their faces. They're clear for all to see. Well, let's put that to the side because these are our friends we're speaking of, and let us take them at their word, for I have then friends, as no doubt you do, who speak with so much nostalgia about back in the day. But then they furrow their brows, a cloud passes over their countenance, and their expression changes. For then they say, but that was then, and this is now. And they say, haven't we tried everything? We have Title VII, we've done affirmative action, we have diversity, we have these programs. Look at who sits in the White House. And then they say, I'm just suffering from compassion fatigue. I've had it. I've had enough of these trainings. You know, I'm just sick and tired of hearing about other people's problems. When they say that, I wonder what they think it must be like to live with those problems. There was that great activist, a name that should not be forgotten from that time period, Fannie Lou Hamer, who you'll recall said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Do you have friends like this? So they're fond of when they marched, but they would not march now because they don't identify with the cause, because they think we've taken care of it and they've just had enough. Anyone who can't make it now, it's just their own damn fault, right? So I talk to these friends, and when they get themselves worked up in a lather, what they finally say is, so when does this end? When is it over? When do we stop celebrating heritage this and that and having museums? And why do I have to go to sensitivity training? And they mock all of these programs and make fun of them. And they want to still be able to tell their jokes. Whatever happened to having a good time anyway? You know who I'm talking about? You can picture someone like this. Well, when they ask me that question, I always say, you know, I don't think it's going to end. I don't think it should be over. And they shake their heads and say, oh, what a cynic you are. How could you be so pessimistic about our future? I say, no, you know, to the contrary, I'm an optimist. I believe that diversity and democracy work together. As Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to sit as a justice on the Supreme Court, wrote in the Grutter and Gratz cases, she said the path of leadership in a democracy must be visibly open to people of all backgrounds. I think that too. Not just open, but visibly open, because for so long it was visibly unwelcome, clearly closed. So I propose an analogy. That, after all, is a law professor's stock and trade, to compare this and that. I propose that diversity is just like democracy in this way. It is a process, not an outcome. Think about democracy for a moment, and this year is one in which we will vote for many people for many offices. It doesn't matter what party you're a member of, what ballot measure you will support. This isn't partisan. Just think about democracy in operation, what we celebrate, what we are known for, what makes us exceptional, a beacon to those around the world. Democracy is a process, it's not an outcome. It would be a tragedy if it were over, if we finished with it. It is not a product that we put on the shelf to admire. It is something that we engage in. We roll up our sleeves and get out there in the public square. We articulate our views. There's a back and forth. There's debate. Sometimes it's contentious. But what is most important about democracy is that we see that it is what we make of it, and that we have rights as well as responsibilities, and we must, above all, participate. So when you go to cast your ballot at your polling place, whether it is a school or church or office this fall, if the man or woman in front of you turns and says, oh, another election, what's with this democracy? You know, every 2 years they want us to do this. I'm just sick and tired of this. When is this over? When does this end? You would realize, well, this person missed an important civics class in high school, right? They don't get the point of it. And so too, with diversity. It's a process. It's not an outcome. It's something that we work on. It's imperfect. There will always be challenges. We make it a little better each go around, but what it also demands most of all is that we participate. And that is what you have done this afternoon by coming, taking your valuable time when you could be billing hours, when you could be out on the golf course, taking your time to form a community of people of all backgrounds, united in the knowledge that the rule of law is essential for everything else that we do. And that rule of law functions only when we have court systems that are funded, only when we have a bar that is vigorous, only when we educate others on how important for democracy and diversity what we do is. This is what it's about. It's about coming together and breaking bread. It is about seeing that diversity and democracy work together, and it is only if they work together that we will achieve the greatest ideals of this nation, of ours. So let us, even in a time of challenge, as we begin a new year, as you celebrate new leadership, ask ourselves how we can participate not just in democracy, but in diversity as well. Thank you so very much.